So Randall, can you talk a little bit about why you were interested in this project?
Sure. So I've done. I just graduated with my MDiv, and a lot of the research and work I kind of did in the last year or so has been around this topic of how the church talks about and deals with sexuality. And so when I found out that this project was happening, I was like, yeah, sign me up. Yeah, let's do it. It's because I think it's a big conversation that needs to happen and isn't happening, unfortunately, in the church right now. And so I'm just really excited that getting the ball rolling.
Yeah, great. What were some of the messages that you received growing up that weren't very helpful to you, and what was some of the effect of that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually a pretty simple message. The message was don't feel, don't date, don't even think about, anything that has to do with sex. So it was just a lot of don'ts. Very little, there was nothing really constructive, there was no like, do this. It was just don't do all these things because there are all kinds of reasons for that. It was mainly, that was the big message. What was the second part of that?
And what did you feel like was the effect of that on you as you were growing up?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still discovering the effects on that. I'm 41 and I've just started a relationship, and I'm still finding it difficult to connect to my own desire still, because I was taught to shut it down, and not just to shut it down, but it was shameful to even have these feelings, and I was taught that at such a young age, and I tried to do that for so long that I got really good at it, and so now I'm trying to unlearn some of that, and it's tough. It's not, desire, sexuality isn't a switch. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. When did you find yourself beginning to question that maybe what you had been learning wasn't of God or wasn't right somehow, and what has been that process for you?
I think I started to understand how unhelpful the church's teachings were in my life. I don't know, probably somewhere in my late 20s, early 30s, I guess, when it just, I wasn't meeting anybody. Or not just I wasn't meeting anybody, it was also when I did meet someone, I just found myself running. Like I couldn't stay in a relationship. And at first I was just confused about that. I thought I was too picky, or I don't know, I had all kinds of, reasons to try to like say why I wasn't sticking around these relationships. But I think looking back now, or after a while, I figured out that was a defense mechanism, because being in a relationship, I would start feeling these feelings that I weren't supposed to feel, and then I would panic, and then I would find an excuse or a reason to stop being in a relationship. And so I think when I started seeing that pattern, I was like, I gotta think of something else is, something's not right, and I want to look at what I was taught and what's wrong with it, and what are better ways that the church can think about these things.
Mm-hmm. And what was some of the ways that you went about doing that to try to figure that out?
Just a lot of reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a ton of reading. Surprisingly, even a lot of the books written in kind of the emergent camp, somewhat really, really smart, hip writers, still have an undertone of don't in them.
Yeah.
Which surprised me. I was a little bummed about that, because they're so progressive in all these other theological areas. They're very risky, some of them. But when it comes to sexuality, they didn't have anything better than, they had better reasons for don't, but it was still, the bottom line was still don't.
Mm-hmm.
Don't and wait were the two big messages.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of reading. What was interesting was the most helpful kind of texts that I found were feminists, and also Christian writers writing out of the from the gay LGBT perspective. And I think that these are people who have, I think, suffered the most harm. I'm a straight male, and so I have harm, but I think women and people in the LGBT community have suffered a lot more, and so to me it's no wonder that they've done a lot more work, and that I found a lot that's been helpful in from those perspectives.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Talk a little bit about what you've begun to come to believe is God's intent in the gift of sexual desire and sexuality now.
So I think that the perspective of don't comes from a perspective where people see the Bible as strictly a moral document, a document about right and wrong. And if you approach the Bible from that perspective, then I think I can see why you end up with a theology of don't and wait. But I think the Bible, the stories, the moral teachings of the Bible are at root about teaching us how to have good relationships. And I think if you approach the Bible from that perspective, all of a sudden, it's not about what you do or don't. It's about why you're doing and why you're waiting. And that just seems like a much more helpful way to think about, well, not just sexuality, but even, a whole host of different kind of theological issues. So that's kind of that shift. And again, that shift has kind of come from, again, this is a feminist perspective and an LGBT perspective. That shift was really helpful because all of a sudden things became clear, things like, oh, I get why, people seem to be missing the point, and I get why these texts are there. Because, there are texts about, lust and being careful around, sexuality and, a proper place for sexuality, but those aren't the end. Those are means to deep and loving relationship. And if you only look at the ends, or if you only look at the rules and don't look at what the ends are supposed to be, then you're just going to miss the point.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about when you think about youth coming up now, what are some of your hopes for them so that they can get to a place of thanking God for sex and sexuality in their bodies sooner?
I hope they can just talk about it, an honest conversation, and with honest, difficult questions. I was never allowed to ask. Well, you were allowed to ask questions, but you weren't allowed to ask the next question. Like, why? What's that about? I could never. It became, don't you trust authority, or some craziness like that, So, yeah, I just hope that we can have the conversation. We don't have to come up with the same answers necessarily, and because I think people are different. People are going to need different kinds of guidelines and boundaries, but people are never going to find out what their unique created selves are until we're able to have an honest conversation about this topic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome.
That was fun.